Hey there, I'm Nicole. Welcome back. Today we are talking about short stories, and I'm going to share with you how I outline my short stories primarily using the story grid. It also not only applies to short stories, but this is also sort of more or less the same process that I use to outline my novels as well, so it works for anything really. And I hope it will give you some ideas and maybe you can take some parts of this process and adopt it for you as well. So I have 7 steps. So I used this process last November/December to write 6 short stories. One of them was sort of a standalone, which is the one I'm going to be talking about now because I don't think I'm probably not going to be doing anything with it. And then the other was a series of 5 short stories centered around Christmas time that at some point I might actually do something with. But just know that I use the same process for all of them, even though I'm talking specifically about the standalone short story. Okay, so 7 steps. Step number 1 is just write down the idea and ask why. So my idea for this, and you're gonna see how my story idea very much transformed throughout this process. My idea was a girl has to figure out what she wants to put in a time capsule that represents humanity at this time, basically. Then ask why. So the 2 whys are, why is this interesting and why do I want to write this? So I thought it was interesting because it could be interesting if the girl is very, very cynical and sort of takes on that attitude of there's nothing good, blah, blah, blah. And then why do I want to write this? I wanted to write it because I wanted something to have sort of a happy ending. I wanted to show someone finding meaning in the world, basically. Okay, so then step number 2 is to mine information from the story idea and the whys by being logical. So my story idea was this girl has to put something in a time capsule that represents humanity right now. First thing to mine there is, why is she putting stuff in a time capsule? Like, is she doing it for herself? It doesn't really fit the cynical character I thought of though. So I came up with, okay, so she's an art major and this is an assignment for school in university. We know now that she is a student. So why is this interesting? It's because she was cynical, so there has to be something in the story that makes her cynical. There has to be some sort of events there going on. So maybe, you know, something bad happened. Maybe she's breaking up with her boyfriend. Maybe she feels like she doesn't really have connection. She doesn't really have anyone. And then, so why do I want to write this? I said I wanted to write it because I want there to be a happy ending. So how does the ending happen? Well, if the problem is that she ends up feeling sort of out in the middle of a lake with no one there, someone has to come and sort of help her see meaning. So I was thinking on that, and I envisioned a scene where someone's sort of crying in a bathroom and then her friend comes over and like brings her up and gives her a hug or something like that, just to be like, hey, there's people here. So that's basically mining information. So being logical, going from those questions that I asked to thinking, okay, so how would this work? What would have to happen? Now I know she has to get to that point where she's crying in that bathroom so someone can come and say, it's gonna be okay, that kind of thing. So that's the mining information step. Step number 3, what that I do is I exploratory write as much as I feel is necessary. So at this point, I have some ideas, right? I know that she's gonna get some sort of assignment, that she has the fight with the boyfriend, the sister gets an overdose, everything's going crazy, she feels super alone, she ends up crying in the bathroom. At the end, she has the friend come to her and then she puts something in the time capsule. So I exploratory wrote a huge chunk of that. Generally, I keep writing until I decide that what I've written is completely awful and the problems are super glaring. This works very well for a short story because I can usually do like 30 to even 60% of the story in exploratory writing. I don't do it in order, I literally just write. Now, in some of my Christmas short stories, I didn't have to do very much exploratory writing. I did a little bit to get the voice, and then I just went to the next step, which is step number 4, because I knew that story very well. But with other stories, there's more problems with them and it doesn't work. So you have to write more. So then once 30 to 60% of it is written, with, again, novels, I usually do like 10,000 words. There's number 4. Step number 4 is where the story grid comes in. This is the point where I find the story grid genre. Now, I can't do this earlier because I feel like if you have nothing on the page, you only have ideas and a little bit of like some lists of scenes, character names, it is so hard. It is so hard to figure out what genre you're writing in and what your story is really about and what it's going to sound like and what the tone is and how it fits a genre. So I think that the exploratory writing is so important for me personally to be able to then choose my genre. So for the story that I've been explaining this whole time, my example, I want to basically show someone going from meaningless to meaning, which happens to be a fairly defined genre in the StoryGrid universe called worldview education. I went to the StoryGrid website. I'm going to link my guide to the StoryGrid. Up below that video has a PDF document that has a whole list of the links you want on the website that will give you this information. So once I know what genre it is, I would go down and write down the conventions and the obligatory scenes that are in that genre and identify which ones I've fulfilled and which ones I haven't. The external value shift is ostracized to accepted. The internal value shift is meaningless to meaning. So there are numerous conventions and obligatory scenes here. So a strong mentor figure, a large social problem as the subtext, clear threat of escalating danger. So in going through and trying to identify which of these I met and did not meet in my story, I realized a few things. Number one, the story that I outlined was ridiculously melodramatic. Number two, it didn't hit any of the conventions and obligatory scenes for the genre that I wanted to work in. So taking that, I proceeded to step number 5, which is fill the gaps, figure out what your story is missing. So I knew that I wanted to go from ostracized to accepted. That's the external value shift of the story. Right now, she did not start ostracized at the beginning. So I kind of started with that question. Okay, what situation would make someone in university, I'm a graduate student, I felt like writing about people in university, feel ostracized, so they have to work sort of to get accepted. One of the things that I like to do is just make a list of dozens and dozens of things. You have to go beyond 10 things because anything within the first 10 will be super obvious. The one that I ended up deciding on was that this is actually a young mother in university, and because she had this child when she was very young and she's unmarried, she feels herself like she can't be accepted because she became a pregnant mom. You can see that the whole trajectory of this whole story changed fundamentally. I do want to note that I worked really hard on trying to understand this genre. I listened to the StoryGrid Roundtable podcast for worldview education. I think their example was the fundamentals of caring. So first I had to watch the fundamentals of caring, and then I had to listen to the podcast and take notes. Also tried to StoryGrid like the genres and conventions and stuff for How the Grinch Stole Christmas, because that is a worldview education story about someone who finds meaning in Christmas. I did a lot of work on that in order to figure out the problems with my own story. I had the new situation. She has to have an external object of desire. There has to be a threat of escalating danger. Well, she's in university. What can that be? She's failing a class. There has to be a shapeshifter who says one thing and does another. Maybe it's the baby's father. There has to be a strong mentor. Maybe it's her teacher, and I actually made it so her teacher was also a shapeshifter as well. I went through each of those conventions and obligatory scenes. I wrote down a few dozen ideas for how I could fulfill all of them. Then I looked at the whole picture and I thought, how do these fit together? What makes sense? What works? And I ended up sort of figuring out what I liked, what I thought would go really well, what would fill the conventions but still be interesting, and tried to sort of develop characters from that way. Okay, I want a shapeshifter. How can I make them unlikable and then make them likable again? All that sort of thing. So you go from sort of a micro to a macro and back to a micro, shifting back and forth. That was the hardest step of this story, making sure that I was fitting all of those conventions and obligatory scenes. That brought me to step number 6, which was brainstorming the actual scenes, which basically involved me listing out what I thought should happen. So step 5 was really getting into all of the details, what the situation is, who the characters are. Step 6 was really getting into what are the obligatory scenes, what's going to happen, how do I make these value shifts or materialize in physical scenes and physical storytelling. I wrote a list basically of the different scenes that I thought I could have, the ones that fit the obligatory scenes, other ones, and then I sat through and I did the 5 commandments of storytelling on those scenes. So I figured out, okay, what's my inciting incident, progressive complication, crisis, climax, and resolution. And that brings me to step number 7, which is the 5 commandments for each scene. So once I have the overall 5 commandments, the overall sort of thread of the story, because it's a short story, I don't do this for novels because it veers too much, but for a short story I generally try to do this. Sometimes it does come in the editing though, is doing the 5 commandments for each scene. So for example, for the first scene of this, the inciting incident is that the character finds her daughter's toy and diaper bag in her backpack. Progressive complications, she has a class after this one, she's going to be late. The teacher approaches her, tells her she's failing, and then someone approaches her and asks her if she wants help. The crisis is, will she accept help and go to her next class, or will she go to her daughter and bring the toy? She refuses help and she chooses her daughter, skipping class, that's the climax, and then the resolution is she is at a worse place in her studies and you have this sense of danger that she is going to fail it. Okay, so those were the 7 steps. Write it down and ask why, mine information, exploratory write, find the story grid genre, fill in the gaps, which is a crazy thing, brainstorm scenes, think it through, and then 5 commandment each scene to get a little bit of an outline. Okay, so that's my 7-step short story process, how I go through and get from my idea to an outline. If this was helpful, please let me know in the comments or give it a like. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your process is like. I'd love to hear it, and see you next time.